Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to today's FP Virtual Dialogue, Promise Over Peril, AI Diplomacy, where we'll look at the realities and risks of artificial intelligence on the international stage. My name is Maggie Lake, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator today. The rapid advancement and widespread adoption of generative AI over the past year highlights the intensity and importance of the global technology competition. As nations scramble to regulate Gen AI while simultaneously harnessing its competitive advantages, the question emerges of how this technology and others like it will factor into foreign policy strategies. How nations, especially the US and China, incorporate AI into their diplomatic dialogue will be a driving factor for global peace and stability. And nations will be looking to leverage this technology to further their own interests around the world. For the US specifically, the issue of how to shape Gen AI's global use and function so that it reinforces its interests of a free world order will be paramount. And so, against this backdrop, we've gathered a group of policymakers and experts to discuss how nations are incorporating Gen AI into their foreign policies and what role emerging technologies will continue to play on the global diplomatic stage. Before diving in, I'd like to extend big thanks to SCSP for helping make this event possible. I know many of you will have questions. We all do, and we want to make sure that we can hear from you, our audience, tuned in and watching our live streams on social media. We have reserved a portion of this event for questions, so here's how you can participate. If you're watching the live stream on our website, click the button below to submit your questions. Please be sure to use your name, organization, and where you're writing from, your location. If you're joining us on social media, you can chime in using the hashtag Promise Over Peril, or you can email your questions to events@foreignpolicy.com. Lots of ways to connect with us. Okay, let's get started. I'm honored to begin our program with Dr. Seth Center, Acting Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technology at the U.S. State Department. Welcome, Seth. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to have this conversation and to be able to spend time talking about AI against the backdrop of foreign policy. We talk about AI all the time, but we often sort of focus on some other areas and maybe don't spend enough time on this. So it's going to be super exciting. Let's start big picture. What is the U.S. strategy when it comes to engaging the rest of the world on artificial intelligence?
Sure. First, thanks so much, Maggie, for hosting me. And obviously, foreign policy is really one of the great thought leaders in the world on all of these issues. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity. And particularly, I wanted to thank SCSP as well for shaping the conversation, making sure that competitive strategies are at the lodestar of our tech agenda as we look out into the world, and really providing an architecture, not just for AI, but for the entire series and constellation of emerging technologies that are going to be critical to our foreign policy. So I really appreciate the opportunity. It's a great question. What is our strategy? I would say, to use a basketball quote from a famous old UCLA coach, John Wooden, it's to be quick but not hurry as we move into this era. At a very basic level, I would just frame all of this around the reality that we have moved extraordinarily quickly into the AI era, both in terms of the evolution of our domestic policy and in the evolution of our diplomacy. What I mean by that is it was only 14 months ago that ChatGPT ushered in a new era of AI conversation. Of course, there was a previous one that many of us were a part of, but it really transformed the cultural, political, and strategic context late in 2022. Within several months, the United States had worked fairly quickly at home to come up with a framework around voluntary commitments for dealing with the challenges of frontier models, working closely with the advanced AI companies. From there, we worked through, as many of you know, a really extensive framework and architecture domestically captured in the executive order that the president launched around safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. And I say that only as a backdrop to the international conversation, where we've really thought geometrically about expanding this strategy from a domestic approach that captures exactly what your series is titled, trying to find a balance between the promise and peril of AI. And we've done that in a few different ways. One, we've worked to make sure in thinking about the geometry of diplomacy, one, that we had alignment in the G7 around these core issues, and we developed a code of conduct for advanced AI developers in that context in October. Within a month, November, at Bletchley Park, working with our UK counterparts, 28 countries had agreed to a basic framework for how to think about advanced AI systems. And we've expanded much further than that. We've had important plurilateral conversations around the world. And right now at the United Nations, we're advancing a resolution around safe, secure, and trustworthy AI for sustainable development goals to make sure that as we have this conversation, it's truly inclusive. It incorporates views north, south, east, west, across ideological divides. So I think actually we've moved quite quickly towards something like an emerging global consensus, at least at the architectural level, around how to strike the right balance.
So it's so interesting you say at the architectural level. We know that within our own country, so within the US, there has been fierce debate about so many of the issues involving artificial intelligence. Scale that out to the globe, and that's got to be incredibly complex. So when we talk about this emerging agreement and alignment, what does that look like? What is the conversation, the AI conversation in different parts of the world? How is it evolving? Where are the differences? Where are we coming together? Because we're talking about different demographics, different economics, different priorities in these countries. What does that global conversation look like? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. And that is the right question and framework for thinking about these issues. We have to recognize that there's a real diversity of views on finding this right balance between risk and opportunity. In the United States, of course, we've moved quickly to think through this through a lens of safety and security. The vice president has talked about a full spectrum of risks. And of course, that was really the focus of the UK's summit as well. I think our counterparts in the European Union moving very quickly towards the AI Act certainly see that kind of regulatory prism as really a sine qua non for developing AI. There's a very different conversation, I would argue, based on our diplomacy and conversations around the world elsewhere in the developing world in East Asia around AI, where they really see opportunities for a leapfrog technology to help them solve a lot of the developing world challenges that are framed through the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the challenges that we have in a global conversation is that sometimes different communities are hearing different messages. So for instance, in parts of the developing world, when they see the framework around safety and security and think through what they see as the regulatory requirements for achieving those thresholds, they see barriers and hurdles to accessing AI and innovation in rapid ways that they think could help benefit their communities. And so there's an important conversation that the United States and its partners are having around the world to explain that as we think about a framework for managing the downside risks of AI, this is really complementary to and supports an innovative approach to AI that can help resolve some of these sustainable development challenges and help companies and countries and economies around the world benefit from AI. It's not an obstacle to AI innovation. It's a prerequisite to do it safely and securely. So that's really the approach that we've tried to pursue. I think I'm relatively optimistic that the convergence around a consensus around this balance is emerging. I think we have to acknowledge that there's going to be different legal and regulatory frameworks in different countries for how this plays out. But the basic agreement, I think, is within reach.
That's really interesting because so when you're talking about be quick but not hurry, they want to hurry because they have massive problems that need to be solved. And they're seeing a path forward. Are there other entities, other powers that are happy to fill that void, where we're saying build this in and have safeguards from the very beginning, sort of take that time to invest. Are there others who are providing the technology without those strings attached? Is that the
So
challenge?
I think that is obviously a real and serious concern moving into the future. Right now, as we think about particularly the application and utilization of advanced AI systems, whether they're chatbots or underlying LLMs, I think we're not yet to the phase where the serious and substantial choices have been made. And that's why this is such a critical moment where we can think about trying to have a real conversations, for instance, about what is entailed in the National Institutes of Standards and Technology's risk management framework for AI to develop a responsible AI governance framework that isn't necessarily onerous. It doesn't create unnecessary obstacles to innovation. I would say I think there is real concern and skepticism around the world around rushing to a regulatory approach for the reasons that you and I have discussed here around creating unnecessary obstacles to investment, unnecessary obstacles to application. And it's really striking if you just look at the polls, Maggie, around the world about who's optimistic and who's pessimistic about AI. Almost all of the polls suggest that the United States is probably the least optimistic nation about the promise of AI, which is ironic given our position in the technological leadership. And many developing world countries, led by India, for instance, but not exclusively, have almost double the optimism of the United States. And so what they're really thinking about and looking for is access to the technology, bridging the AI divide as part of a larger effort to bridge a digital divide. And then, of course, as they're thinking about how to adopt and adapt AI technologies, to make sure that they do account for linguistic diversity, cultural sensitivities. And so if these systems can address those kinds of concerns, then they're very eager and optimistic about the
Why
possibility.
are we more pessimistic? Because if we're thinking about this as a powerful diplomatic tool and we're the most pessimistic country, that's, I would think, problematic, especially if others are running toward this. What would I is it because we worry about the democratic or democracy, how this impacts democracy, or is it demographics and we're just older? Do we see something that others don't? How are you fitting this in the traditional diplomatic dialogue?
Well, look, I can't run a psychology experiment on the American psyche and AI. I would say the administration has worked very hard to frame a balanced approach, both in its domestic policy and also in how we've talked about this in the world. Um, our theory of the case is very clear. You're not going to reap the benefits of innovation in AI. You're not going to reap all of the extraordinary compression of scientific gains and economic benefits that could come from this era if you don't properly address the socio-technical risks of developing safe, secure AI systems. And to complement that, if you're not deeply cognizant of the potential downside risks and dangers for society, whether they're disruption of labor markets, whether it's concerns about exacerbating or amplifying discrimination and bias. And so I would say the overall official US position and policy has not been excessively pessimistic. It's just by nature, there's just a tremendous amount of excitement around the world that I think is a real opportunity for the United States, for the technology leaders in the world to capitalize on.
Mm. China is investing heavily in AI. We know that. We see the headlines every day. How much of a competitive threat does that present? What is the US approach in terms of continuing a global dialogue with China or without
Sure.
China? How are we approaching that competitive threat?
So there are important competitive dynamics at play in AI as part of a larger technology competition, which I think the administration has been very clear about. And then there are certain cooperative imperatives around the specific nature and evolution of AI technologies, which we also have to be cognizant of. And I don't think necessarily what we're talking about is contradictory approaches. We're simply approaching this in a sophisticated, nuanced way. At a competitive level, the reality is that these AI technologies are going to be applied for military uses, for strategic advantage. And it is not in any way in the United States' interests to allow the most powerful drivers of an AI future, which are AI chips, to be in the hands of strategic adversaries who are going to apply them for military uses or human rights abuses. And so, I'm struck by what Secretary Raimondo said recently. She said, we cannot let China have these AI chips. We're going to deny them this cutting edge technology. Now, that's one part of the strategy. But in AI safety and risk, this truly needs to be a global conversation. Chinese or backed companies are developing powerful AI systems. We have a shared interests, not just with China, but every country around the world, to make sure that as these systems are developed and deployed, that we have a shared sense and framework for how to manage the risks, how to reduce the disruptions, how to make sure that they are predictable, that they're explainable, that they're red teamed, that there's a certain amount of auditing of the systems before they're deployed, the kinds of basic blocking and tackling of good AI design that we think all countries should embrace as they and their companies develop these systems.
And you think it's possible to have sanctions and engagement a parallel track at the same time?
I think they're very different conversations, but yes, absolutely.
When we're talking about the global competition, there's also global competition for talent when it comes to this. Does the US government have the talent needed to be a world leader in this space and pursue our diplomatic agenda?
I think there are two components of a question around talent. One is the talent ecosystem that drives innovation at the level of research and commercialization. And there, I think the United States is and will continue to be very well postured. Obviously, it's in our interest to continue to have the best AI talent in the world interested and excited about studying and working in US universities, working and innovating in US startups and working in US companies. And a core part of the executive order was to make sure that we have reduced all of the possible barriers of friction to making sure that that talent can continue to support the US AI ecosystem. And if it can't, if folks do not want to come to the United States, of course, it is in our interest to make sure that they're working closely and working in partner countries. And so I think we have a pretty solid advantage in that realm. The other piece of this, I think, Maggie, that maybe is underlying this is how do we get the best AI talent into government to make sure that we apply AI for better government services, better national security applications. This is the kind of work that the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence worked very hard on. There's important parts of the executive order on AI that open up new pathways and direct hiring authorities to facilitate, again, the reduction of friction to bring people in. It's been our experience, and I think it's validated that there are a lot of people who'd be very excited, AI scientists, data scientists, to come serve in the US government in different capacities if we reduced the basic challenges to working in government. And part of the executive order has been, again, to focus on the ways we can break down those barriers.
And that is the promise and the amazing opportunity that this technology will provide for. And we're going to leave it on that note. Dr. Seth Center, thank you so much for joining us, Acting Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technology at the U.S. State Department. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie.
So let's continue our conversation now and broaden out and bring in our panelists. We're going to continue on this. Nick Bramble, Head of Trade Policy and Economic Opportunity at Google. Bonnie Glick, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and Joe Wang, Senior Advisor at SCSP. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, that was for me, a really fascinating conversation and a chance to really understand how the U.S. is approaching what is a really and all nations for that matter, a really complicated and fast-moving technology. I love that he started out saying, "Be quick but not hurry," because it's just moving at an exponential pace, and I know you're all on the front line of that. Bonnie, let's start with you. You work for both the government and private sector throughout your career. How can the US best leverage this emerging AI technology to promote democracy and peace? It was really interesting to me that Seth focused on the architecture. I mean, it really seems like they're trying to sort of have this conversation at early stages and maybe learn from some of the lessons in the past. Where do you see the biggest opportunity here?
Maggie, thanks so much. Thanks, SCSP, for pulling this together along with foreign policy. I think Seth's comment of be fast but don't hurry sort of reflects the history of AI as it was developed largely in the United States in the 1990s, early 2000s. It was with the advent of the internet and newfound access to mountains and mountains of data that the idea that a system that could ingest the internet and come up with answers to some of the world's thorniest problems became very appealing, especially as it related to health. And if ever people thought there was going to be a cure for cancer from the information that was available at the time, it was through artificial intelligence. Then developed countries started to expand on capabilities collaboratively with some of the best universities in the world. New technologies were invented. I'll call that AI for good. But your question about where we can have the biggest impact, or where artificial, not necessarily we, but where artificial intelligence can have the biggest impact, Seth started talking about is in the developing world. When I served at USAID, we launched the agency's first digital strategy because AI, at its heart, and akin to Seth's comments, was a concept that was starting to come up in emerging market countries, developing countries. And we thought that we should, as a government, but as well as the private sector, we should be looking at solutions that take a digital first approach. And perhaps there's a solution that can be reached by using the vast array now of digital tools that are in digital toolboxes in everyone's smartphones. So these new solutions, new technologies, new inventions, new discoveries, they're no longer the purview just of Silicon Valley and other high-tech centers around the world. Sometimes these solutions are in high schools and trade schools and universities and businesses everywhere, from, we'll say, Albania to Zimbabwe. So I think the developing world space, with guardrails in place around the trustworthy use of artificial intelligence, are part of the conversation that we need to have moving forward as we talk about the power and the peril of artificial intelligence.
And I think it's worth just giving that thought space for a moment, because instinctually we all move to the peril, the scary things, the risks, that rightly so, because this is incredibly powerful technology and it's moving so quickly. But there is this enormous unlock that's possible, that I think that we sometimes doesn't get as much space, at least in a headline way. If anyone was joined FP's events in New York this past fall, we had an ophthalmologist from Rwanda, I believe, who understaffed, not enough in terms of scanning retinas, and we're using AI in the field to prevent blindness. I mean, just scaling enormous opportunity. It was extraordinary what she was telling us they were able to do, and that was just one small example. Nick, I imagine from a private sector point of view, this has got to be a huge focus.
Yeah, thanks so much, Maggie. And yeah, I really liked Seth Center's remarks about sort of the differing views on how different countries are optimistic about AI and why. Because I think we're seeing that in our own survey data and our own research as well, the appetite for harnessing AI to address major challenges in emerging markets is incredibly high right now. 75% of people in many developing countries say that they think AI is already benefiting the population in terms of health, equity, education, and other issues like that. Whereas it is a bit lower in the US and Europe and other developed countries. But I think trying to find those examples of how we can work together and really harness AI to take on major public challenges. Flood forecasting is one thing that we've been focusing on a lot recently, given the real pressing challenges it presents to human lives and to crops in developing countries. So we've really developed some new tools to harness AI for flood forecasting, for earthquake alerts, which can say if they're delivered early enough, it can save lives quickly, and 50% of people benefit from those kinds of early alerts around earthquakes. So there's a lot of the sustainable development goals I think that AI is capable of addressing. I think it's very important to underscore too, though, that the economic benefits are still nascent, but I think incredibly promising. There's some early studies from McKinsey, from Goldman Sachs, and others estimating that AI can have a productivity impact of up to 1.5% annual increase, which is about the level of the electric motor in terms of productivity impact increases. And could generate up to $26 trillion in GDP globally. But you really do need to have a smart strategy for harnessing AI and a smart public policy strategy as well for creating an enabling environment while addressing many of the risks that Seth and others have talked about. So I think it is really important to figure out how do we put this together into a national AI strategy, and how do you connect this to our diplomatic efforts as well. If there's anything we've seen, it's that AI is inherently a cross-border technology, and we really need to be working together with our allies on governing AI, but also promoting those opportunities and figuring out how we can work together on harnessing AI to take on those major public challenges that we all need to take on right now.
Yeah. I mean, Nick, it's a great point. It is the ultimate cross-border. You cannot have this conversation in a bubble or domestically only. I mean, by its very nature, it is a diplomatic foreign policy issue. Joe, I wonder, I think the challenge Nick just touched on is that this has to happen simultaneously, right? This is moving so quickly that you're trying to deal with the economic opportunities and the unlock at the same time as the security. I mean, to a certain extent that happens, but I think it's extremely evident with this right now because of the speed it's moving with. How do we have can the existing framework handle this when we're dealing with this issue? Do we need to be thinking about new models or new platforms in order to address this quickly enough? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. Thanks to FP to helping us convene this important discussions, and obviously thanks to Seth and Bonnie and Nick, who are good friends of us as well. No, I mean, your point is extremely important. I think Seth touched on this a little bit in his remarks as well, about the fact that we've been working through the G7, working with the UK's AI Safety Summit process, in order for to really tackle this issue of how do we actually think through some of the regulatory things that we need to get in place to make sure that we establish the trust and safety in the things that we're developing to be able to promote it to the rest of the world, at the same time as we're dealing with this entire series of geopolitical challenges around the world that's happening at the same time, right? I mean, we see what's going on in Ukraine. We see the prospect of tensions and conflict in the Taiwan Straits at the same time as the Middle East is also flaring up again. And so the ability for the US to actually lead is really being tested right now. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind really is that we still have, there's no other country that has built the same network of alliances that we've had over the past 8 decades. And the fact that the US has been able to establish this sort of trust with our allies and partners is something that we need to remember. And so as we look to the future and think through what we need to do around AI and other emerging technologies, one of the things that the US has been doing really is building out some of the new partnerships and new alliances that we need to think through. India. Seth talked about India and the critical importance of thinking through the different possibilities of what the US and India can do in the future. It's a tremendous opportunity, and I think both sides really are seizing the opportunity here. And one of the things the administration has done with our Indian partners is launched the initiative on critical emerging technologies. Same thing with Korea and Singapore. After this ISET was launched, both the Koreans and Singaporeans went to the administration to think through what can they do to work with us bilaterally to make sure that we're investing in the technologies that we need to win the future. And so there's really a lot that's going on across the entire landscape of security, economy, and then also the regulatory aspects to make sure that we actually are putting together a comprehensive approach to think through how technologies can be can be used to make sure that we are thinking through the national security implications, the economic prosperity implications, but also the societal issues.
That's, Joe, I think you just, I think there's a misconception out there, or there may be, that um, technology itself, but certainly AI technology, is just moving with lightning speed, and the government is glacial. Like, we know that we're mired in gridlock here and everywhere. Things by committee, that just the nature of it tends to move really slowly. It sounds like you're saying there's more happening than we may be aware of. Do you feel like the response time is adequate, that things are moving at a pace where we can have forward motion in these alliances and in building out these dialogues and frameworks that are necessary?
Yeah, look, I think Seth said it really, really great at the very outset, right? We need to be quick, but we can't hurry. Because the reality is history doesn't end. And so getting things right really is actually part of the equation of how we need to succeed. And so, there's always a lot that's happening behind the scenes between governments that's not always front page news. And that's ultimately the work of diplomacy. It's investing in the partnerships longer term to see how do we make sure that we identify those core interests between our nation and other nations, and work on building the infrastructure to support a longer term perspective on deepening the partnership that we can create with our partners, and really seeing through. And I think Seth and Bonnie talked about the fact that when it comes to developing countries, right? I mean, the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has set out is one of the key things that AI and other emerging technologies can really unlock. And so, really thinking through what are the key things that the U.S. can do with our partners and allies to really build out some of the positives around technology is something that needs to happen at the same time as we think through the regulatory framework, as well as we deal with the reality of the geopolitical competition that's happening around the world right now. And you asked Seth the questions around how to deal with China, and that's really a key thing that we need to think through. Because if we're not the ones, if the United States and our allies and partners are not the ones who are going out there to promote a vision for how technology should be used in our countries, there actually is somebody out there that has an alternative vision that we may not like.
Yeah, Bonnie, can you weigh in on that? Because this is especially interesting given what Seth was talking about in the, optimistic, forward-leaning, wanting progress now, understandably, from Asia, from some of these developing countries that have young populations that see the opportunity. How do we need to think about China?
Yeah, Maggie, I think that in America and in much of the world, we like to be polite, but I think the elephant in the room is really the peril of AI, and we see it in coming out of China in the Ukraine war. We see it with Russia and its campaign of misinformation and disinformation. There's an awful lot that's written and talked about the abuse of AI, and we cannot ignore that. We can't ignore that authoritarian regimes use AI to suppress dissent, to disseminate this misinformation and disinformation in order to target adversaries. And I think we're sleepwalking if we think that certain apps don't collect personal data that they're going to use for malign purposes. There are very real dangers to democracies that come through the use of AI tools and seemingly harmless apps. And there's an awful lot of talk, as you all know, about TikTok. I think the benefit of living in a free society is that these are the systems that create and discover, but they also share these discoveries. And sometimes the people who take advantage of our openness use our sharing to their own ends, often without appropriate guardrails. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there are geniuses who invent and create largely in the United States and in the rest of the free world. These are the geniuses. And then there are evil geniuses who manipulate and pervert that good intent of AI to solve the hardest problems of agriculture, of healthcare, of upskilling the workers of the future generation. We need to be grateful for the geniuses and hope that those people continue to prosper. But I think we also have to be vigilant about the evil geniuses and protective of the resources that they want to exploit.
Yeah. Nick, how is, from the private sector point of view, how do you think about guardrails? What's the conversation?
Yeah, and I think we take Bonnie's warnings very seriously as a company. I think this is not the social media era that we are in right now. This is a new era when we are taking a much more proactive stance on upfront addressing those kinds of risks and harms, externalities around AI from a safety, from a security, from disinformation perspective. And it's also been very reassuring to see the U.S. take a very strong leadership role when it comes to these governance institutions, both through the NIST risk management framework that Seth referenced earlier. As a company, we have our own AI principles that are in many ways sort of very consistent with that framework. And then over the last year, we've been very supportive of the White House efforts to stand up new commitments around security, safety, and trust, many of which are also embodied in the recent executive order that Seth mentioned. The Commerce Department is also standing up a new AI Safety Institute. And the important thing, again, on the international stage, this is happening together with our allies. It is really important for the U.S. to sort of not just address these issues domestically, but also to work with the UK, to work with the G7, to work with the G20, OECD, United Nations, all these bodies to stand up an approach to governing those safety and security risks that we're all concerned about, but also ensuring that we don't lose sight of the promise of AI. I think sometimes we get so quickly into the security and safety risk conversation that we lose sight of that opportunity in the US sometimes. And I think it's important to ensure we can strike the right balance, that we can sort of both promote AI and understand where it's capable of addressing these major public challenges we have around the Sustainable Development Goals, around economic growth and addressing workforce challenges, but also recognizing that we can do that at the same time as we address those safety and security risks. And we don't need to do so in a way that inhibits innovation. The U.S. has shown, I think, to the rest of the world a very strong model right now for how we can approach those issues together, not separately, not in silos or in buckets, but as one unified strategy. So I think that's a very helpful learning that we've taken away from our work with the U.S. on these issues so far.
Yeah. And I think this just underscores, once again, very much like when we're talking about climate, the need, the imperative for public-private partnership, right? You cannot do what you just talked about without really close coordination between the private sector, where, as Bonnie mentioned, some of those geniuses are coming from, which tees us up perfectly for this next question from the audience, which is amazing. And I want to get all of your responses on. So this is from Zach in Columbus. And his question is, or his comment question, I just left a leadership role at an AI company. I had applied to several U.S. government agencies for opportunities, but in the months that I've been waiting for a response process toward an offer, I've received 7 times in writing offers, or more than 7 in writing official offers for roles at other tech companies. I have a top secret clearance and polygraph from former Defense Department IC careers, but my experience and others in my network who are seeking to find opportunities in the U.S. government is that the U.S. government still has a big challenge with talent management, especially with recruiting, hiring, and retention. How can U.S. government agencies compete with the industry on talent bleed? I mean, Zach, thank you for writing this, because this is at the heart of all of the great stuff we were just talking about. And this is why I asked Seth the question. If we don't have the talent, here's someone who wants to work for the U.S. government, who has the genius that Bonnie just talked about, and he's getting lost. I mean, let's, I want to get all of your response to that. But Joe, let's start with you. Do we need to do better here? By the way, Zach will put you in touch, but do we need to do better here?
Yeah, I mean, look, Zach, great question. And this is something that's been plaguing the US government for a long time, right? It's not just something that's been happening over the past year or 2 years. It's a long-standing issue for the USG to really bring on people at speed to really cover the different variety of skill sets that we need inside government. But look, I think, Maggie, the key thing is that, we need to look at it a few ways. Like, first is that there are still people like Zach that have that ambition and desire to serve their nation, right? And that's never going to go away. And so for us as a nation, I think it's amazing and terrific that we still have so many young people and so many people mid-career and across their entire careers who still want to serve, right? So we need to find a way to really capitalize on the fact that there is this desire to recognize that there is a larger national interest in a lot of the things that's going on right now, and we need people like Zach and others with the right skill sets to be able to help our government do the things that they need to do. The streamlining of the processes within government is, again, something that's longstanding, and hopefully there actually are some AI solutions to help kind of speed up the work that happens behind the scenes. Because I think we talked a lot about the safety and security issues when it comes to AI, and those things really do matter, right? But the reality of a lot of what some of the back office and some of the more direct applications of AI right now really is to speed up some of the back office processing of paperwork. And if we can find a way to really seize on the power that technology can have to really help us move forward the processes, then we can really unlock new opportunities, new positions, and new jobs for people like Zach.
Absolutely. I just was thinking as we're talking about the promise, this is one of the promises of AI at a sort of much earlier level. And you're absolutely right, Joe. And Zach, thank you for wanting to serve and your friends. I'm sure that there will be a way that will be able to happen. But we appreciate that, and we need you all more than ever. Bonnie, as somebody who's had, again, experience in government and the private sector, I know you're probably very familiar with this. But this is important. And again, I think for both you and Nick, this is a place where private-public partnerships probably have a lot of room to flourish as we're thinking about how do we optimize and share the best talent we have, and not have someone trying to make their way through the digital abyss. Your thoughts on talent recruitment and retention?
Maggie, the digital abyss is real. Zach, let me thank you so much for your willingness to serve and your eagerness to serve. Please don't give up. The U.S. government is struggling, and this, as Joe said, this is more longstanding than I like to admit. It takes way too long to bring people on into the federal government, and one of the things that the Office of Personnel Management for several years has been looking at is alternative hiring mechanisms to bring people in at the mid-career level, at the more senior level, with particular tech skills that are necessary, for which they have to be competitive with the private sector. There are also lots of programs that different agencies run. And so if you're looking at and targeting a specific agency, they may have partnerships with the private sector companies wherein they have exchanges, 2-year exchanges where somebody from the private sector company comes in and works in a federal agency, using and deploying their skills from the private sector, and also taking away ideas about the way the federal government operates, as well as vice versa, with federal government employees going into the private sector and gaining experiences there. That public-private overlap is really important for building a cohort for the 21st century in both sectors, the public and the private. And I would also say the nonprofit sector. The hope, one of the promises of AI, is to cut through some of this needless, truly needless bureaucratic red tape when it comes to hiring people into the federal government. And my hope is that we'll make traction very, very quickly before you get your 8th offer from a private sector company that sways you away from federal government service. The last thing I'll add in is don't forget state government, because state government is also an extremely important place that needs and requires cutting edge technology skills that you and your friends possess.
I love it. Don't give up, Zach. Nick, not to respond directly to that, but what do you think is needed or could foster greater cooperation between the government and private sector? What do you think would help, or what are some of the challenges that you face?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually I went through one of these programs myself called the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, which brings in people for a 1-year tour of duty at a particular agency and sort of staffs them up and prepares them to sort of help harness technology in a positive way. But it still is a relatively small program. There's the U.S. Digital Service. There are other different models out there that are meant to sort of bring people in for a period of time with tech expertise. But I think we need a way to scale these up right now. One thing that we have called for as Google is calling for the development of an AI core, similar to AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps, a model that really, I think, trains up government workers and private sector as well, and nonprofits on AI skills, and brings expertise into governments at the federal and the state and the local level, where they're very much needed right now. If we're actually going to derive these benefits and actually, figure out ways to harness AI and also train industries beyond the tech sector on how to leverage AI in an effective way, we need smart people in the government. And there are many smart people in there already, but we need a lot more to really drive this home. And I think one of the corollary benefits of building up this AI core concept is not only would you bring expertise into governments at the federal, state, and local level, but this would be a way to help familiarize the broader American population with the tangible benefits of AI, help demystify these technologies, and show how you can equip workers with foundational AI skills. You can modernize and defragment different workforce and skilling programs across the government. And there are so many corollary benefits to building up and sort of having this national strategy that recognizes the centrality of AI to our domestic and diplomatic efforts, that it feels like it's a huge opportunity. And we actually did see the Department of Homeland Security last month announced its own version of an AI core. So we're hopeful that there's going to be more of these models emerging across the USG in the near future. So happy to follow up on that with you.
I love that idea. Fantastic. And it sounds like exactly what's needed, I have to say. Joe, as we start to wrap this up, just like to get final thoughts from all of you. I think this is, I really like that we're able to spend some time about the promise and innovative ideas like Nick just said. I mean, there is so much out there. What's your call to action? What would you like to see happen? Where should the focus and priority be for everyone who's listening to this?
So two things. First, just to build off of one of the things that Nick talked about, I think, one of the ideas that we thought about here at SCSP as well was like to really address that like security clearance dilemma while people are waiting to get cleared to get government jobs. One of the ideas that we floated was whether organizations like SCSP or others can really kind of can work with the government to kind of serve as that sort of a waiting room, as people are waiting for formal offers to come through from the government for the clearance to fully go through, that organizations like ours can offer people placement to just give them some time to work on things that they might touch on while they're in government. So and give them something to do while they're waiting for the clearance to come through, right? So I think that could be hopefully another idea that we can really build out to make sure that we keep people like Zach and others who are in the pipeline focused on their desire to serve. So the other thing I want to mention really is for SCSP, we're going to do our next big event in May 7th and 8th. Our big AI Expo for national competitiveness. It's going to be really, bringing together all of the disparate actors from industry, from government, from academia, to really talk about the issues that we've been talking about throughout the entire series of Promise and Peril. Really focusing attention on having industry partners beyond an exhibit floor to really demonstrate some of the innovative technologies that they're working on. We'll have a center stage where we'll have an entire speaker program talk through different issues when it comes to technology and geopolitics. We'll have large conference rooms to hold a series of side events to really build on all the things that we've talked about throughout the entire series. And so I think a lot of the work that we've done at SCSP really is bridging the public and private divide when it comes to tech and tech policy and tech strategy. And so a lot of these convenings are important because there are some restrictions between what our friends in government can do in terms of engaging with industry partners. And so hopefully, the AI Expo is going to be another great event to really push forward a lot of the discussions that we've had already on the Promise and Peril, and really focus on how can we promote the promise of what technology can do for transforming national security, economic prosperity, and societal cohesion.
Fantastic. We will, I'm sure FP can share where you can get all the information if you want to attend that. I think that, often in business circles and in corporate life and in the investing world, if you are not understanding, if you are not talking about AI, if you are not engaging in it somehow, you are falling behind. I mean, we all need to be, even as citizens, plugged into this and understanding what's going on. So I think that's fabulous. By the way, I love the idea of, it sounds like what you're talking about is sort of a sandbox or incubator while people are waiting for clearance. And we know, how successful they are in the private sector, Nick, when something like that happens. So can only imagine the amazing ideas that would come from something like that, bringing people together while they're waiting. So they're not just, waiting at home for their, email to ding, but instead are really kind of rolling up their sleeves and working on important issues. So that's two fabulous thoughts, Joe. Bonnie, what about you? Final thoughts, call to action?
I think the biggest call to action, Maggie, is to look at AI at its core as the most democratizing technology ever. All you need is an internet connection. And in this way, the world can become much more cohesive if we talk about the promise. And particularly, we have what we refer to as a youth bubble or a youth bulge in the developing world. And there are so many people, billions of people, who are young and eager and smart and have smartphones and can develop the technologies of the future. They no longer need to be tethered to a laboratory or to a particular geography. And I think that'll lead to spectacular economic growth and development around the world. So it's a very exciting moment, keeping in mind that we also have to ensure that there are appropriate guardrails.
Right. And time is of the essence, right? That we are at risk of losing them. We had another series at FP where there's a lot of concern that young people around the world are turning away from traditional government institutions, from the democratic process. They're kind of losing faith. So it's incredibly important that we reach these people now while there's an opportunity and participate in that innovation, no?
I could not agree more. This is where American diplomats, free world diplomats can engage deeply, meaningfully. They don't need to have a deep understanding of AI. They need people, young people in particular around the world, to engage, and finding ways to bring them into the fold of this new opportunity is really vital now.
Yeah. And Nick, last thoughts from you. And I think that, certainly the media at large, the internet at large, call it what you will, has spent a lot of time on the sort of scary negative headlines around AI. What would you like us to think about as we leave this conversation?
Well, you just cutting this back to our main theme. I think AI diplomacy is just as crucial for America's domestic interest as it is for our foreign policy interests, given just the nature of the cross-border opportunities and challenges and the way AI is developed and researched in a cross-border sort of way. So the more we can do to help democracies align on ensuring AI is trained on demographically and geographically diverse data sets, that we can work on building up infrastructure and innovation capacity together by building up new kinds of resources on AI research and AI data, and ensuring that all people have access to AI skilling and training resources. One thing that I've been really excited about actually is that the EO also tasks USAID, I think along with state and commerce, to develop an AI in global development playbook, which I think will be a great opportunity to figure out how do you galvanize U.S. government efforts around this, and then how do you build a stronger multilateral and bilateral efforts to ensure that AI is being developed in a bold and responsible way, and that we are really leveraging it to accomplish what we think it is capable of accomplishing in terms of its economic benefits, its societal benefits, its health benefits, its scientific benefits. There are so many ways in which we need to work together to achieve those. And if we don't work together, many of those benefits, I think, will fall by the wayside. So really important to sort of double down on a vision for cooperation on this in the foreign policy context.
Well said. Nick, Bonnie, Joe, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you in the audience who've listened, who participated. Zach, for your question. Today's conversation has really highlighted the challenges and opportunities that governments are facing with the rise of generative AI. It is evolving, and it's an important topic you'll continue to see FP cover. A big thanks once again to SCSP for supporting today's event. You can read more about this topic and the full GenAI report from SCSP linked right here on our website. And you can register now for the 5th installment of the series coming on March 14th. We'll focus on AI and defense, which we touched on a little bit today. Stay tuned for updates from us on that, as well as all other upcoming events at foreignpolicy.com/events. Thanks so much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.